Nathan Zachary and the mysterious masked air pirates of the East will return after this message from our sponsor, Fairchild Aircraft. Hey, pilot, tired of getting shot down by flying Christians defending their wheat fields because that rickety plane of yours can't keep up? Then how about stepping into Fairchild's superstar of the skies, the Brigand? Power, prestige, women, maybe. All can be yours with this armored and armed king of aerial offense. Intrigued? Of course you are. Then stay tuned for the next episode of Max Lore.
As air piracy began to take off in the 1930s in the fractured states of America, the men and women who chose to become aerial corsairs quickly realized that most aircraft companies did not particularly like selling their planes or plane parts to those who could use them to target their customers, primarily the new nation-state militias of North America, or even worse, the corporations themselves. More often than not, pirate gangs would use whatever they could borrow or steal. The main exception to this rule are nations that have a strict neutrality policy about selling goods, such as Free Colorado, and more specifically in this case, Colombia. Colombia was the last remnant of the old United States, consisting of the former lands of Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Delaware. In the post-United world, they were essentially a neutral country that often hosted the other nations and helped them resolve disputes diplomatically, much like Switzerland in Europe. This policy of absolute neutrality even extends to the companies that call Colombia home. Companies like Fairchild Aircraft, which happily sold their airplanes to anyone and everyone, citing their home nation's neutrality laws whenever the other aircraft companies complained about their lack of morals. As a result, this no questions asked policy about selling their products have made their planes quite popular with air pirates. Fairchild itself started life as a civilian aircraft company, with its most popular plane, the Fairchild Hawk, being seen as status symbols for the rich and those high up the social ladder. But when the old United States collapsed and chaos reigned in the crimson skies of North America, Fairchild began to see an opportunity they couldn't pass up. So they began to militarize their plane lineup, including the Hawk, now rechristened as the new F4 Bandit. As the decade of the 1930s rolled on, they continued to perfect their craft of warplane design, eventually releasing their most popular product, the Fairchild F6II Brigand. The popularity of the Brigand and Fairchild's neutrality policy have made the aircraft a regular sight with both air militias and pirate gangs. Specifically, militias based in the Dixie Confederacy, Empire State, and Appalachia being favored customers. Even the Mormon government of Utah uses brigands to keep their borders safe from Navajo aggressors to the south. As has been mentioned, pirate gangs also favor the Brigand, but one group in particular had taken a shine to the aircraft for their nefarious purposes: the Red Skull Legion. Their leader, Jonathan Genghis Khan, prefers to fly a Devastator, the Whitney's neglect. But as for the rest of the Legion, for many their plane of choice remained the Brigand, such as Khan's right-hand woman and wingman, Henrietta Hettyhawk Corbett. But why is the Brigand the go-to for the Red Skulls? Why is it rumored that Khan even traded his stocks in Fairchild Aircraft for a pair of Brigands? The answer is simple. Fairchild has, to date, generally not failed in making a reliable product, and the Brigand is perhaps the current peak in their design methodology. Starting off with the basics, the Brigand is classified as a heavy fighter, with room for 2 pilots in the cockpit. They have a wingspan that is 41 feet and 1 inch, and a length of 30 feet and 9 inches. While that's all interesting, a plane can't even get off the ground without a proper engine. To that effect, the Brigand is out of the factory, configured with a 16-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R600 mounted forward in the tractor configuration, despite the current popularity of putting the engines in the back in the pusher configuration, as seen with the designs of Fairchild's rivals like Hughes Aviation. There are some quirks to this engine and airframe combination, however. The R600 does give the Brigand great speed, a maximum of 250 miles per hour, and a max acceleration-deceleration of 65.6 feet per second squared. But the engine is very fuel-hungry, and due to the large size of the engine, the torque it generates on the fuselage causes the plane to want to roll to the right, which forces the pilot to either counteract this force by keeping the flight stick slightly to the left, or by modifying their controls to do that automatically. but some few daredevils use the torque to make right turns easier. Flight performance numbers and notes are great, but the skies of the fractured states of America are a dangerous place to be, especially if you intend to either defend your interests and territory or harass someone else's, either of which often happens with frequent regularity. And at the end of the day, few things become more important than the firepower or potential firepower one can bring to bear in their aircraft of choice. Fairchild knew this, and straight out of the factory equipped the Brigand with 4 Anderson Mark 103 50 caliber cannons mounted on the wings. But that wasn't all. To remind any potential tailgaters to know their place in the hierarchy of the skies, the Brigand comes equipped with an electrically operated rear turret that is outfitted with 2 Westmore Dragon 30 caliber machine guns. Supposedly, the accuracy of the rear turret guns is debatable, but at the very least it'll remind any aggressors that tangling with the Brigand is a foolish decision. As for rockets or bombs, the Brigand could be loaded with enough hardpoints to support 8 of either ordnance, much like every other plane. However, gravity is still very much a factor in allowing for a plane to take off and get into the air, and bombs and rockets tend to be heavy. As such, how much ordnance can be added onto the Brigand without compromising its ability to fly or perform maneuvers depends on the total weight of the plane in addition to missiles or bombs added. By 1938, some Brigands were upgraded further, but whether these were options provided by Fairchild or simply modifications done by their owners is not known. But by this year, some Brigands could be seen armed with 4 or even 6 1-inch wing-mounted cannons, along with upgrades to its armor, speed, and durability. Also during this year, many Brigands were also outfitted with concussion rockets to complement their offensive capability. The Brigand was not just a favorite of the Red Skull Legion, and they were often seen elsewhere in the hands of the infamous Black Hat pirate gang. Alongside their fleet of Warhawks, the Black Hats used the Brigand to terrorize continental America from the west coast of Hollywood to the Empire State in the east. They were cunning, brutal, and deadly efficient, nearly bringing down the powerhouse of Blake Aviation Security to its knees. What brought the gang even more notoriety was the fact that they were working with Sacred Trust Incorporated, an air security company much like Blake Aviation in a very elaborate scheme. What the Black Hats would do was raid targets across America, often with the intention of humiliating Blake-protected sites and Zeppelins. And following an attack by the Hats, and Blake's clients being upset at BAS's poor performance, would find themselves perfectly in position to be open to a new security provider, Sacred Trust. This scam would continue on until world-famous air pirate Nathan Zachary and his gang, the Fortune Hunters, put a stop to it over the skies of Manhattan in a deadly confrontation between himself and longtime enemy Lucas Miles, the mastermind behind the Sacred Trust conspiracy. But the entire saga of STI is far too complex to be covered with the depth it deserves here, so that story will unfortunately have to be covered another day. However, the Black Hat Brigands were most prominently used in at least 2 battles that can be talked about here. The first being the assault on the Red Cross hospital ship Compassion. While the Black Hats were primarily tasked with advancing Sacred Trust's interests, they were still pirates, and often indulged in regular pirate activities like kidnapping for intent to ransom. How convenient for them then that the CCCP passenger Zeppelin, the Worker's Voyage, had been attacked by pirates and was forced to crash land off a shallow coast of Pacifica. The Red Cross hospital ship, the Compassion, responded to their distress call and began to provide emergency assistance. This is when the Black Hats chose to attack. Using air balloons to drop attack boats on the water, they would assault the hospital ship and capture the passengers to be ransomed off to the Soviet Union and Red Cross. All the while, the Brigands would be on scene, flying air support to prevent any wannabe heroes from interfering with their despicable business. And on any other day, they would have succeeded, but certainly not today. For the Fortune Hunters, led by Nathan Zachary, chose to live up to his reputation as the Gentleman Pirate by responding to the Compassion's distress call. The Brigands fought hard, giving the Fortune Hunters enough trouble that would crush weaker opponents. The Brigands' overwhelming firepower at the front managed to effectively challenge their enemies, while their rear turrets were able to keep the fight going if their opponents had the bright idea of attacking from behind. Here, Fairchild's finest aircraft easily proved itself a highly capable and tough gunship, as many of its previous victims could attest to. Unfortunately for them, the fortune hunters were anything but their regular prey, and the battle turned against the Black Hats thanks to the cunning strategies and audacious piloting of Nathan Zachary and his gang. While the Black Hats were defeated, and the wreckage of their brigands resting comfortably on the ground, this could very easily have gone the other way if any group but the elite pirates of the fortune hunters had intervened on behalf of the Compassion. Then there was the battle in the Rocky Mountains over the skies of free Colorado. A flight of Blake Aviation security planes were tasked with protecting two cargo zeppelins, the Mercury and the Twain. What made this flight special was that Paladin Blake, the founder of BAS, was leading the protection of these zeppelins personally. A black eye for Blake by the Black Hats here could very well have been a severe blow for BAS, and the Hats were sparing no expense, sending Brigand and Warhawk wings along with a military zeppelin to devour the cargo of Blake's zeppelin wards. And they would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for those meddling fortune hunters. Blake was in serious trouble by the time Nathan and the gang arrived on scene. The Twain's gas bags had already taken hits, and the Hat Brigands were giving Blake's planes enough grief, in addition to the Black Hat Warhawks making torpedo runs against the Zeppelins. Despite this dire situation, Paladin Blake remained skeptical of the fortune hunters' intentions, but faced with near certain defeat, grudgingly accepted their aid, and thus the next round of the battle quickly began. The battle was furious, and the Black Hats, with the Brigand in its arsenal, once again nearly won the day for their sinister employers, were it not for the fortune hunters thwarting their plans. While the Warhawks might have been able to attack the Zeppelins directly, much like their own Zeppelin, they would both still be prey to the faster Blake fighters during this battle, who would delight in making sport of large heavy targets like Zeppelins or Warhawks. Were it not for the Hat Brigands in the field challenging and defeating Blake Aviation's planes before the arrival of the fortune hunters, theoretically speaking, their help might not have been needed at all, and Blake could have fared far better in the fight without losing a Zeppelin as they had. But there's one more story that involves the Brigand, this time with the Red Skull Legion and an attack on a People's Collective base located in former Kansas. The pilot of the Brigand in this story was named Harry Kenyon, who was accompanied by his co-pilot and bombardier Michael Fritz Schmidt. Harry and Fritz were assigned to the Red Skull wing that had the responsibility of taking out the anti-air defenses of the PC base, which would then allow for the Red Skull's own Zeppelin to come in and steal whatever was valuable. A subsequent Red Skull fighter wing would draw off and annihilate the Defender aircraft guarding the location, but the static defenses of the People's Collective were fully alert and ready by the time Harry and his wingmates began their attack. As they dove in to strike, flak clouds burst around them hoping to take out the pirates. One such flak blast nearly took out Harry's Brigand, hitting the wingtip and showering their plane with damaging fragments. But this was not enough to deter Harry and Fritz, and they were able to complete their bombing run to destroy the Collective's defenses with ease. But on the return trip back to their home Zeppelin, a People's Collective defender that the initial sweep missed snuck up on Harry's Brigand and opened fire, critically damaging the aircraft, and further injuring the pilots. But before it could finish the job, the other Brigands in the flight were able to chase it off, which allowed for Harry and Fritz to limp home in their damaged fighter. Once they were safely back aboard their Zeppelin, the Skulls managed to take stock. As it turned out, the combined flak blast and cannon fire from their quarry very nearly took Harry's wing clean off. It was only thanks to the Brigand's toughness that it managed to stay attached long enough to make it back in one piece. The first flak blast shattered his airplane's canopy and managed to injure him, and the cannon fire impacts from the Defender managed to do the same, almost making a date with the Grim Reaper for Harry inevitable. In fact, when he was getting metal fragments pulled from his injured body, the Red Skull doctor noted that if one of the fragments that he pulled out had been a handspan lower or higher, Harry would simply not be alive. So thanks to the Brigand and its solid construction and abilities, Harry was able to gain a new nickname among the Skulls, Lucky, which was far better than his old nickname, New Boy. Before we conclude, one last note of interest should be made about Fairchild aircraft. In an alternate universe, meaning ours, Fairchild would undergo a series of name changes from the 1930s all the way up to the 1980s and 90s, while still remaining in the business of making aircraft. In fact, perhaps their crowning achievement in this, alternate history was the development of the A-10 Thunderbolt II. Yeah, I didn't know that either. Can you imagine if air piracy was still a thing by the 1970s? That the pirates could potentially have access to a plane with a reputation for such raw power and destruction? It's a terrifying, though exciting prospect to think about. What more can be said about a plane that was able to wield such an immense amount of power in the skies? Its design speaks for itself, and its achievements throughout its history do likewise. Fortune favors the bold, and the bold favor the Brigand.